Okay, we are looking at This War Without an Enemy, the English Civil War. This is from Nuts Wargames, which is a French company. I don't actually have any of their games currently, but the games of theirs that I've seen before have all had really great production quality, and I don't know what it is about French publishers that they have figured out the art of good wargame art, as it were. This cover is very evocative. It's got the some great painting on there with the St. George's Cross of the flag of England. A great font for the title itself. Very nice period evocative artwork with some sieged buildings burning in the background. Just really cool, evocative cover. Fairly standard on the back. You got a picture of the board there with some blocks on it. Weirdly, they don't show the artwork on the blocks on the back of the box, which seems like a missed opportunity there. I guess it's right there. Never mind. But on the board, you don't see them. But yeah, there at least you can see. And this is a good example. These are just very good artwork on the boxes. Some samples of the cards there. Also very good period artwork and fonts on the cards as well. This is a block game, as you can see. Gorgeous map. Kind of hard to see just because it's kind of right under the lights on my table. But has the various colored regions of England. Anybody playing this game will surely compare it to probably the best strategic game on the subject, which is Unhappy King Charles there from GMT. Another game that has just wonderful production quality and great artwork. You can never really go wrong with using those fonts. That sort of, I don't know what font it is, but it has that very 17th century look to it. And this game also utilizes it, throughout I guess not on the cards there. Looked like it was more on the cards on the back of the box, but that's pretty standard kind of Times New Roman font. But the artwork, of course, is great on these cards. And, just some more examples here. Great little bits of that, again, that 17th century artwork. So just cool to see. And then, the board, just looking at some of the detail on the board, great artwork for the cities and the different regions. But Unhappy King Charles uses a similar color coding to kind of code the regions because, and this does the same thing that Unhappy King Charles does, which is the blocks, your troops are sort of dictated by regions. So you can see here, just looking at the blocks, this is an E here. That means these guys are Eastern region troops, so they cannot leave this region. They can't move to the Midlands, for example, without a leader, either a regional leader or a generic leader. So, for example, Essex here, he is a just standard leader, meaning he can operate all over the entire map and never is tied to a particular region. Unlike somebody like Fairfax here, who's a northern leader. And so he can only command northern troops. So he would not, for example, be able to command eastern troops if it was just these two guys in a stack. And also, he can leave the north, but at the end of the year, he's going to have to come back to the north. So remember what strength these guys are at. The game's basically over at this point. The parliamentarians won on a lucky battle result where they captured King Charles, who was besieging London. And there's the King Charles block. He was captured at the battle. His army was besieging London, and the parliamentarians came in and relieved London and ended up conquering or defeating his army and capturing him. That gives them an immediate 2 victory points. They were at 0, and the victory point thing moved 2 in that direction. And I still technically have to do the winter turn up there. It's the last turn of the game, and I believe that's where you just move, the victory phase, which the parliamentarians did not have 3 victory points. If they'd gotten to 3, then by the victory phase, the game would automatically end there. Instead, we get to the year-end phase, which is turn 6, winter turn only. So I'm playing the 1644 scenario, an introductory scenario that is just the year of 1644. So all you play are the 6 turns. So we'd be moving to here, the winter turn, in 1644. And I believe that there's no way that the Royalists could regain a victory point during the winter turn. Let's see. Siege resolution, victory phase, year-end phase. New blocks are added, regional recruitment, regional blocks turn home, the card decks are prepared. So let me look at this scenario, because I think, and there's errata here. So I'm doing the mid-war scenario. This introductory scenario, the parliamentarian player must match the historical performance of the parliamentarians to win. The 2 VP swing can be achieved by taking 2 cities in history that took York and Newcastle, or by capturing the king. The thing is, they start at -1, i.e. they start with 1 towards the Royalists, because the Royalists have captured Bristol. But here it says the scenario rules, there's a modification of the victory phase. If it's the last turn of 1643, and this is, I think they just copied this directly from the first intro scenario, which starts in 1642. That's the full war. There, the early war. It's 8 turns. They just copied the scenario rules here. I think here they mean 1644, because this is only 6 turns, which is 1 year. So this should be 1644. The game automatically ends at this point. Victory is determined as follows. The Royalist victory, 0 or 1 more VPs for the king. Parliamentarians, 1 or more VPs for parliament. So when we were at 0, because why were we at 0? I don't remember how I got to the, I think, or sorry, it was at 1. We were at -1. They captured Charles, which moved us to a parliament victory point of 1. Yeah, for some reason I was at 0, I thought, and it had bumped up to 2 when I captured Charles. But I don't know why. I didn't take any cities. This siege of Newcastle had been going disastrously. And then I tried to, I split some of the parliamentarian forces away and sent them up north to try and also hit York. So I moved the Covenanter army in to take Newcastle. And they were up to siege level 4 and just could not get the city to surrender or even take any attrition. I mean, this guy still has 3 points, for crying out loud. It's very tough to take port cities through attrition alone. But storming is so difficult. If you don't have just massively overwhelming odds and you're storming unbreached walls, you're wasting your time. So I could not take Newcastle, which would have been worth a point. So I thought, well, I'll try and take York, but the Royalists reinforced York and then my attack. So instead of them retreating into the city, when I attacked, they had enough blocks there to actually fight it out and just completely annihilated my attacking parliamentarian force. So trying to take York was not an option, and they were at the point where like the Royalists could have tried to go after Hull at this point. They were strong enough, or relieve the siege of Newcastle. So what I ended up doing with the parliamentarians, that's how they got the extra point. I took Oxford, that's right. So I had another force here in Cambridgeshire and Huntingdonshire, and sent them here. And when I moved Charles's force in to siege London, I left, I think, 3 or 4 blocks here under Prince Rupert to guard Oxford. And rather than retreat into Oxford, which would only take 2 blocks, I had Rupert decide to fight it out in the field. It did not go well for them. So the parliamentarians took Oxford, so that bumped them back up to 0. And then when they captured Charles, by relieving the siege of London, that put them up to 2 points here, and gave the win to the parliamentarians on the last turn of the game. So, but this is just a 6-turn introductory scenario. So you just play the year 1644. Overall enjoyable. It's light. It is much lighter than Unhappy King Charles. So if you want to play a strategic level English Civil War game that looks beautiful on the table and can play relatively quickly, I think this is a good solid effort. It has all of your classic block mechanics. It has a battle mat that you fight your combats on, and again, also similar to block style games that have these tactical mats where you separate your units into the different areas. This feels a little bit different to me because it has specific cavalry engagements and then cavalry pursuit and rout as a whole separate mechanism from your traditional, infantry will have the strongest infantry units, cavalry will have the strongest cavalry units, and you take your rotate your losses from the strongest units. Here you've got things where like artillery can fire on turn 1. Then your infantry can choose to fire at reduced effectiveness, or they can wait to engage. And between, if they don't fire, the sequence would be artillery fire, then infantry fire. But if your infantry opts not to fire, it will engage, but that won't happen until the cavalry fights. So if you wait to have your infantry engage, they will fight at better effectiveness than they will if they're firing, because if they're firing, they're at a -1. So, if you've got 2 quality units, they'd be firing at a 1 quality instead of engaging at full 2 strength quality. So it's a decision you have to make. I found myself attacking with the parliamentarians more in this than I did with the Royalists, and so for some reason I just opted, when I was the Royalists, I always fired with my infantry, and it was really very effective. Now they had a lot of 3 strength infantry units versus the parliamentarians that only had 2, and so I rarely fired with my parliamentarian infantry. I would almost always engage with them, but the trade-off of that is that as the attacker, you're absorbing all these hits before you're firing back, and so if your defending infantry opts to fire and they shoot the crap out of your infantry, you've got much less infantry that's engaging, and you also have less infantry if you say, oh shit, I don't want to wait to engage now, I should probably fire back. Well, now you've got like a lot fewer blocks firing back at on 1s that have to hit on 1s, and so it really favored the defender when I fired with the Royalists. But again, you kind of need the higher quality infantry to really have much chance when you're firing with your infantry. And then your cavalry would fight, and cavalry would exchange hits with themselves only. And then if you eliminated cavalry, you'd have to roll for pursuit. And so, even if you eliminate the cavalry blocks, as in, typical musket and pike era games, if your cavalry pursues, then it's essentially out of the battle. You move it over here to the pursuing cavalry. So it becomes a non-factor in the fighting. It only becomes a factor for determining victory. after the third round. The other possibility is that if cavalry takes more than one hit in a round, it could potentially rout, and then you rout your cavalry off over here, and so they also become a non-factor in the fight, and can potentially be pursued. So there are multiple ways, kind of, for this little sort of cavalry mini game to occur during the combat sequence. So I liked it. It adds a little more strategy to how you conduct your battles, and then in the direction that things can go. If you're artillery, if all of your blocks get eliminated and you have artillery left, then that artillery can be captured and can be used to replenish your own artillery blocks, or nearby adjacent artillery blocks during the regroup phase after fighting. So some more stuff you can do there with your artillery blocks. So I enjoyed the tactical mini game. Sometimes it can be kind of tedious in some block games, but I kind of enjoyed it here, just because it could be fairly swingy. You get a lot of it's buckets of dice at that point, and you get a lot of you can get a lot of unexpected hits going on that can really mess up the most well-planned battles. And then same thing up here with the siege. The sieges can really go against you, especially if it's a port city. The siege table involves the siege and surrender table here, siege attrition and surrender table. Like, these spaces do not cause attrition in port cities. So, at low level sieges, like, you need to roll really high to have any effect at all. And I just consistently rolled like 1s and 2s for the siege of Newcastle, and always got either nothing or these stupid, no siege unless it's a non-port city, or no attrition unless it's a non-port city. So I just could not. And then for the bombardment, I'd have to roll a 6 because I only had, I forget what it was, four points of artillery strength there, and so you're only going to get a breach of the walls if you roll a 6. Never rolled a 6, so never got a breach. So trying to storm it, if you're storming the walls, the infantry is considered indefensible terrain, and so this guy has 3 pips on him, for example. It would take 9. I'm sorry, not 9. It's 2. You have to inflict 2 hits to do 1 point of damage. But every hit you actually hit with only does a half a point of damage. So when you realize that it's like, oh shit, it takes 4 actual hits just to eliminate a single pip on any defenders that are behind unbreached walls. So it's just, you're never going to be able to reduce this guy before he just destroys everything you're attacking with, because you can only storm with a limited number of blocks. So for here, for example, you could storm with 4 blocks, so they could bring all of these blocks in, but in the time you're taking to try and inflict the 12 hits you're going to need to actually, and it's not even that, actually I guess it is 12 hits that you would need to eliminate this guy. He's going to be firing back at, I think, a +1 efficiency, meaning he's at a 4 or less, and he's hitting normally. So, this guy's rolling 3 dice and needing to hit on 4s every round. That's just going to decimate your attacking forces before they can ever eliminate more pips from him. So really what you want to do is try and get it with attrition, but if you roll crap, like I did, you're never going to take him through attrition. So it is very difficult to prosecute sieges, at least, within a year span, before everybody has to go home. So it was enjoyable. You can see here I did eliminate the parliamentarians in Wales. Clearly I should have been more focused on this, thinking that I could just try and get London through a siege. And really all the royalists have to do in this scenario is just hold on. They just need to try and keep the victory points from changing. And so obviously I should have protected Charles better. you know, I went after London in an attempt at a distraction, and obviously should have protected Oxford because that just gave up an easy point. So I kind of dispersed my royalist forces too much. Well, the parliamentarians, with the addition of the Covenanters, had enough to try and go after two royalist victory point cities in the north, which was historically what happened. This was such a disaster here for the parliamentarians. I figured there'd be no way that they could recover from it. And so kind of acted almost recklessly with the parliamentarians in kind of splitting up their forces and going after Oxford. Because the royalists had dispersed their forces, I saw it as an opportunity to try and go after a weaker force in Oxford, and that paid off. And then decided to also relieve the siege of London, and that ended up giving me Charles, and that was a battle that went poorly for the royalists as well. I did try and make a move on Bristol to try and retake Bristol down here. It did not go particularly well. These guys, you can see, and I think I reinforced them probably at one point, but I think they were down to ones at one point. So these guys got beat up pretty bad. They won the combat, but did not have enough strength left to really threaten Bristol, which I reinforced with troops from Ireland, and put some clubmen out here in order to, because these guys started here, and this was empty, so I threw clubmen in here to keep them from just making an easy attempt to go right after Bristol. So this kind of stayed in stasis down here, and everything really happened kind of in the Midlands, with the disastrous parliamentarian attack on York that kind of changed the parliamentarian strategy. So the card play is fairly simple. Cards are either going to take place in the operational phase or the tactical phase. So your tactical cards are going to be where you're going to choose a battle and have something on the card happen here. This gives you an advantage on bombardment. This gives you an advantage on artillery use during a battle. This gives you an advantage, and this Charles actually used this here in the siege of London. This determined last stand, which made his guys all tougher to hit. When they were down to 1 point left on their blocks, but I did so much damage on the last round that it didn't matter. And then you've got just generic. Your basically these are kind of like campaign cards here, which are just straight up ops points you can use. And so what happens at the start of each phase is players out of their hand of cards will secretly play cards and then reveal them, and then whoever has the higher number becomes player one for the turn and takes the initiative for that turn. So these cards are your kind of initiative grabber, but they don't give you any special event. It's just purely points to use, and you can spend those points either adding more pips to blocks to reinforce them, bringing blocks on the edge of the map there and there from your recruitment pool, and you can see they lost a lot of guys. You can bring blocks on from your recruitment pool at 1 strength to whatever region they're assigned to, and then you can even use those points to flip those blocks up to higher strength if you want. So just simple, elegant systems that are going to be familiar to anybody who's played a block game before. The cards have, and this is kind of the Unhappy King Charles CDG influence. The card, how you play out your cards, how you spend your points, how you calculate the initiative. On a particular turn, like, oh, this turn I really need to go first, so I'm going to throw down my big card. That kind of stuff factors in, just like. I don't remember if I know Unhappy King Charles had an initiative mechanism. I don't remember exactly how it worked, but how you play these cards, and then some of the cards, much like a CDG, will have a year on them. This one comes into play in 1643. You've got other cards that come in 1644 and 1645 and 1646. You'll add those to the deck for a particular year as it comes in, and they will. At the same time, you can also have cards that are leaving the deck after certain years, so your deck will adjust every year. as you play, which is kind of cool. First of all, adds some historical relevancy to the game. Certain things that happened in those years will be represented in the cards in that deck. Certain plots or events with the armies or things like that, like the new model army for the parliamentarians will come in I think 1645. So all of these kind of historical nuggets will be interspersed throughout the game to give you that historical flavor. So it's not just a generic block strength combat game. A little bit more than your typical Columbia block games, 8 pages of rules type thing. So the rules for this are pretty good. They're pretty clear. There are some things like it's not evident looking at a city here what the strength of the city is or the size of the city is. So London is a size 4, and I mean you can kind of deduce it from the storming because the number of blocks that can storm a city is double the size. So you've got 8, you've got 4, so for size 2, but then like Hull is one where it's like, oh, only size 1, even though it's a size 2 city. So you can't really use this, and so it's not clear. You just have to remember that London is a 4. Any of these other fortified cities are a 2, and I think these cities are a 1. And then these are victory point values here for the cities. So something like that is like might have been nice to have on the map what the size of the city is, just for those of us who can't remember off the top of our heads. But that's a small complaint. Otherwise, I think the rules are clear. The reading about about how battle reserves, it took a little bit because it's like, well, things can get complicated if you've got blocks coming in. Say these guys come in here, and then you bring these guys. You bring 2 guys across the border into there, and then you got a guy that comes in here. Like if you've got blocks coming in from every direction, you have to choose one set of blocks that came in across one border to be your main attack, and those guys are going to start on the battlefield at the beginning, and then everybody else who came in later through another border comes on as reserves. So the thing is, you're not doing these things as it happens, and there's no way to mark those things except maybe to adjust, arrange them on the map and the border that they came in, because you're doing all your moves, then your enemy's doing all his moves, and then you're moving on and deciding battles based on the player number 1's choice. And so it could be a while after you've done all your movement into a particular area that you're actually going to resolve the battle there. So if you haven't organized where your blocks came in at, you may have trouble reconstructing, oh crap, what was my main attack force? Who were the guys that came across one border that I have to choose to be my main attack force, and then everybody else who came in has to be part of the reserve. Like you have to arrange them in a way that you can remember how to do that. So that's something that's takes a little bit of finessing to make sure you're doing it right and not forgetting, since there's no counters or markers or anything that you can use to kind of determine that. So again, it's probably not going to be an issue, but if you've got some big scrum happening right in the Midlands where you've got everybody converging on one spot, because open borders, the dash borders don't have any restrictions on the number of blocks that can move across a border and attack. So, you could end up having a lot of blocks piling up in a particular region. So that takes a little bit of understanding. The withdrawing, there's a lot of differences to the rules in terms of strength capabilities when you're doing a retreat and a withdrawal from a battle. So there's just more stuff, more chrome, more steps to keep track of, more variables to keep track of than in a typical block game. So that's really the most kind of, I don't even want to say onerous, but just the most trickiest part of keeping track of this stuff. And you know, none of it is particularly difficult. Just some things you need to be aware of, that it is not going to be a you know, very limited amount of variables. You're going to have more variables than a typical block game to deal with here. So otherwise, I think there is, yeah. So you know, there's enough handy stuff on the game turn player aids. The player aids are pretty good of explaining everything. I did have to jump back to the rules, you know, just to remember what I could actually do for each action, and you know, reminding myself of where city sizes and things like that figure in. You know, just typical first time you're playing through stuff. But most of this is pretty clear. It has most of the details you're going to need. You know, about supply phase, about how many blocks can be supplied in a particular region, depending on the type of region that you're in, how many blocks the cities can add, and you know, so here it says cities can supply a number of extra infantry blocks equal to their size. You know, again, got to remember what size your cities are, and you know, there's not a lot of them, so it should be easy to remember, but still would have been nice to have it on the map. Only other complaint, component-wise, is that this battle mat is really, it seems like this could be, it's pretty flimsy. I feel like this could have been thicker, or a piece of cardboard, you know, like a nice, like another little mini board off to the side, instead of something that's barely as thick as, in fact, I think this might even be a little heavier because it has like this glossier finish on it than this does. This does not seem to have the same finish, the same sort of shiny, slippery finish that this has on it. And so that at least would have made this feel more durable. But since you're going to be, you know, using this a lot, moving blocks around, this is a piece of cardboard. Would have been nice. But, you know, again, these are all minor things. I think the game is very well done, very well polished, very well developed. No errata, except like I noted, for the 1644, the mid-war scenario, it looks like a copy and paste job on the scenario rules here. So I assume, though, that the victory is looked at the same way. The only thing different, the same way as the 1640, was the early war, 1642, end of 1643. I assume this is, these conditions should be the same, and just the year would be changed. I'll probably post on the forums about this, that, hey, FYI, the year's wrong here. I haven't looked into the other scenarios, so I'm not sure if there's potential errata in those or not, but that is the only thing that I've noticed so far. I think somebody else pointed out on the forums that in the example of play, there's a couple of things that don't match up in here with either what the rules are or what the pictures show. The only one that I can remember offhand is there's a point where victory points change in one of these, and they got the victory points wrong. Like when they do another victory point adjustment, they're adjusting from the wrong number of victory points than were established earlier. So just something to be aware of if you're reading the example of play. For, you know, a good guide on how to play, there may be some minor inconsistencies in there to keep track of. So otherwise, for this intro scenario, a little 6-turn sample, you know, and obviously you're not getting a true experience with this as a block game if you're playing it solo, because the whole point of block games is to have the unknown, you know, fog of war about what troops are where. Now, I never really knew, you know, it's like when I was attacking up here, I was like, I don't really remember what these guys even have in York as I'm attacking with the parliamentarians. So, you know, just my own memory is a help when I'm playing block games solo, in that, you know, I'm not paying enough attention to remember what the strengths and types were of every army that I'm attacking. So, you know, it's again, it's not a true block experience if you're playing it solo, because you're not getting the fog of war. But, you know, for me, it's close enough that I can enjoy it, and I think get a very good sense of how the game plays, you know, even though I might remember, you just have to play like you don't remember what the strength of your units was. And so I never really played it that way. I just made moves based on, you know what, I'm gonna go after York, or I'm gonna, you know, try and hit Oxford, since I know they only had 3 blocks there and I can bring 5. You're just making those kinds of decisions. You're not making a decision like, oh, I've got 5 blocks here, and I know for a fact that he only has, 1 cavalry and 2 infantry, or, I was never thinking of it that way. It was always playing as though I just don't know what they have here and taking a risk on the number of blocks, guessing that simply having more blocks will be enough to put me over the top. So just things like that can help you solo a block game, so you can at least, as in the case here, get a good sense of how the rules work and how the game plays. So there you have it, a look at This War Without an Enemy, a new game from Nuts Wargames. I recommend it. This was a Kickstarter. I don't know what the retail availability of this is. Probably it will be available in retail, at Noble Knight, or, well, I don't know about your larger American domestic retailers like Cool Stuff or Miniature Market, but certainly I'm sure this would show up at Noble Knight at some point, so that would be a way to get it domestically, if you didn't want to order it directly from Nuts, which is based in France, so you'd have overseas shipping there. But if you can find a copy, I would recommend picking one up if you are interested at all in strategic English Civil War stuff, and either don't have a copy of Unhappy King Charles or don't want to devote the time, because Unhappy King Charles is a much longer game, and definitely more difficult in terms of rules. This is much lighter and easier to play, but I think still gives you a really, really good sense of how the English Civil War was fought and the limitations that these armies faced strategically at the time. So definitely recommended.